tuatahi, he mihi ki ngā aiwi o Tāmaki Makaurau, tēnā koutou Ngāti Whātua, Waikato Tainui, Ngāti Pāua, me o Hononga, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Ko Victoria Passau tōku ingoa, kei Tāmaki Paenga Hira ahau e mahi ana, he kai whakahaere Online Cenotaph, me te pātaka matapuna ahau. Kia ora everybody, I am Victoria and thank you very much Shona for welcoming me back today. I think I've done a few of these talks over the years and I was having a chat to some of my colleagues that I could absolutely talk about Online Cenotaph, the whole thing off the top of my head, but this, I thought I'd challenge myself and talk a little bit about the work that we've done in the last 3 years, where we've been doing a huge amount of transcribing. And I want to say hello to Marion and Stoney who are here, who are some of our intrepid transcribers who have kindly turned up to support me. So let's begin. So Online Cenotaph turned 25 in 2021. It turned on the lights in December 1996, and it was focusing on all the names of the Hall of Memories in World War I, World War II in the museum. So it was the 16,000 names that were on those walls. And over the years, we've developed to include World War I embarkations for the Army, World War II, and then we've moved on to trying to cover all of the conflicts that New Zealanders have served in. So Online Cenotaph, initially we sort of relied on really large data sets, so the embarkation rolls that were provided by the government. So the New Zealand government, for example, for World War II, created 16 volumes of listing all the people who served in World War II, and that was our source data set. So we were supported for the World War I and World War II by external partners to transcribe those files and provide them to us. That was when I think we were all in a different financial time and where we could afford to pay for transcription. And over the years, we've sort of figured out that possibly we can't continue to maintain that level of cost. So we sort of tried to figure out a different way of doing things. So in the last 3 years, we embarked on a program that was supported by one of our former colleagues, Dan Miller, who made this at the time, at the sort of mid-2019, an audacious request to move down to Wellington so that he could image material in Archives New Zealand. At the time, COVID hadn't happened, so it was unusual for somebody to work from off-site. We'd never had a fully off-site staff member before. And I think some people were like, what? Why is he moving there? And then now after COVID, we've gone, oh, we understand why he moved down there. And so thanks to David Reeves, our director, who really supported us in supporting him to go down to the Archives New Zealand, where he sort of lived for 18 months. And he identified a huge number of files that were publicly available. We worked with Archives New Zealand. They were really open to us utilising their material. All the files that we use are things that anyone off the street can go and request. So these aren't secret files. These aren't anything that is sort of private. They've been transferred from the Defence Force to Archives New Zealand for people to use. So as I sort of said, that in the past, our database has focused on World War I, World War II, and that's because that's what information we had access to. We had other forces such as Vietnam, because Ministry for Culture and Heritage had released a list from Vietnam and we were able to add that information. But we knew that there were conflicts like Korea, Malaya, Borneo, and other smaller conflicts that were not covered in our database, as well as J-Force. So Dan used his phone, which in hindsight, I probably should have bought him a camera, but he used his phone to take photos of nearly 20,000 images of 150 files, and Archives New Zealand also provided us with imaged files as well, and they are really great people to work with because you can ask them to image things and they will put it in a prioritized list and they will image it for you. So, so for an organization like us that needs content, it is great to be able to, for them to be able to do that for us. So as I said, we didn't know that COVID was going to happen. So in my mind, I was like, I don't know how we're going to transcribe all these files, but go for it, Dan. And then COVID happened, and we had 13 or 14 full-time visitor hosts who normally walk the floors and provide incredible manaaki to our visitors at the museum. They were at home and had no work to do, and we wanted to give them some purpose, and these poor souls transcribed during their 30 to 40 hours a week to be able to start transcribing the files that Dan had imaged. And we also, during that time, pivoted our volunteers, where we have volunteers in Paenga Memorial Discovery Centre, which is in level 2, and the volunteers were then shifted to becoming online volunteers, and it included other people from around the museum who had volunteered as well, who started typing out the names, and we've still got a number of them transcribing today. So the visitor host transcribed for every lockdown that we had, basically, and as I've said here, what would have taken 2 to 3 years was completed in a matter of months. And 2 to 3 years would be one person typing all day, every day, 40 hours a week for that long. So it's a huge amount of work. I don't know if this is what this says, but I printed out the whole list of all the files that we went through. This is just an evocation of how many things we've done and how many things we've processed. So the orange says there's 200 files that we have transcribed, and then I've still got a long way to go to get those files into Online Cenotaph, but it was a mammoth amount of work for for my team of 3 to manage, to sort of administer, and we all did it on Google Drive, which I think my friend Steve in IT didn't quite like us using Google Drive, but no, we couldn't provide access to our volunteers any other way. So in that time, we were able to spend this. I sort of did a little bit of a presentation a couple of ANZACs ago to say how much stuff had been transcribed. And I'm absolutely made up that it was 10 million characters typed, but I feel like it was something like that. I started counting and I was just like, I'm never going to figure this out, but I did a guesstimate. So this is not audited. And so I think you see the stats and you think, oh, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's just tens of thousands of new records, tens of thousands of new things that we can update and add to the system. So I probably have 400 Excel files that look like this that I have to slowly get into Online Cenotaph. So wish me luck. But it's just amazing that now when people go, oh, my dad served in Borneo, we can use this as a resource. Even if we don't have the records up, we can still go back and use it as a resource. So the completed projects, the major ones, and we knew there was a massive gap, was Navy, for our Navy records. Air Force is also a major gap. We know it's a major gap, but they didn't have the similar type of list that we had access to for this project. So we were able to create 8,000 new World War II Navy records. So it was using multiple files that we had received from Archives New Zealand and melding those together. So it's not just getting one source, it's getting multiple sources. That just creates like an archaeology of information, added layers and layers and layers of information. So every time we add something, we're adding a little bit more detail into records. Pacific Army Service, so that's T-Force, which is Tonga, Fiji, B-Force, Norfolk Island. Again, Pacific Army Service is not really well known, and also Pacific Air Force is definitely not well researched in New Zealand. So we were able to update those records to say 7,000 Army service personnel served in the Pacific, which again is really interesting. Families want to know that information. Prisoners of war is always a topic of conversation. People come in and want to know. And so again, we were able to update, and in the last probably 4 years with other lists, we've increased World War II prisoners of war's names from being maybe 1,000 to over 8,000. So that's Italy, Germany, we've got Japanese prisoners of war, and others where people have just been able to tell us that, and we normally trust that they're not lying to us. That's just, we do most of the stuff on trust. Korean War, we had nothing. And so we were able to update that from a K-Force role, which was excellent. So it means that people who were in World War II and then maybe possibly Vietnam, that middle chunk of service was not reflected in their records. And so we're now starting to be able to build up information about that service. Borneo and Malaya, so we've sort of moved into the professional side of service in New Zealand. They are really significant. Our veterans are still alive, still alive and kicking, and really wanting to acknowledge themselves as well as their comrades. And they're not masses of numbers, but the people who served, and for us is really significant to be able to acknowledge their service, especially around, again, getting Navy lists in, because we've been working really closely with Borneo Army veterans and Malayan Army veterans, but we didn't have a list for Navy, and we were able to get that information in. This is the stuff I'm working on now, and it's only a small amount of things that I'm working on. And so again, it's being able to enrich our data set. So for example, Merchant Navy, which I'll talk to about later, that's considered the fourth force, and it wasn't really acknowledged until quite recently, like in the last couple of decades. And so we've received, there were, I think, 11,000 cards, or I could be misremembering 10,000 cards, of people who served during the conflict, and we're typing those out, and there's really not that many lists. I don't think there are really any other than those cards lists exists of Merchant Navy service, where they absolutely put themselves in harm's way to support World War II, other service personnel and other forces. We've also got the WACs and the WAFs, and other things that I'll talk about a little bit later as well. So Stoney, I'm sorry. I didn't tell Stoney that I put his face up here. I'll pay you a fee. So Stoney has been working with Online Cenotaph for more than probably a decade now, and he's spent a lot of time. He's a real interest as an ex-RNZAF service person, transcribing Air Force files. And I sort of wanted to talk about the volunteers, because sometimes people talk about the data, and the people behind both the names on Online Cenotaph. Those are individual living people, people who had full lives, but also our volunteers and our digital transcribers do an incredible job, and we absolutely could not have done any of this without their work. And it doesn't matter how fast you type, as long as it's accurate and we get the information, and I don't care how long it takes, because I've got enough work already. We also have Marguerite, who received a museum medal last year, and it was basically a lot around her involvement and commitment to the Auckland Museum Institute, but also the thousands of hours that she has taken working in the archives, in the museum archives, as well as supporting us during the transcription project. And this morning she sat me down and she was just like, I don't know who transcribed this before, but I might have to start again. So she's still into it. She loves working in the museum, and then also working from home so that she can transcribe, she can just get her public time talking to people, but also going home and doing a bit of transcription at home as well. The beauty of our transcribers is that they're overall very pedantic, which is an absolute medal of honor. That's what I want. I don't want a person who just types whatever they think. So we have lots of conversations with our transcribers about what things could be, or if there's inaccuracies in the documentation and things like that. So it is a real sort of a labour of love from our volunteers. So it's really awesome. So the reason why we do all this, and with all of our staff and volunteers, is that we're wanting to make sure that we enrich the records of our personnel. And I've chosen randomly 3 service people to show that what happened in the past for these service personnel that we may have only had their World War II record listed in Cenotaph. But for example, I think Ainsley Boyd was in World War II, Korea, whānau and Vietnam, and possibly Malaya. I can't remember off the top of my head. I probably should have written it down. But we would have only had World War II and Vietnam. So there's a whole chunk of time where there's nothing reflected. And so we are filling that gap. And that's the same with a Rear Admiral Carr, where we only had World War I, and then we were able to see that he was also served in Korea as well. And so that's why we're doing it, because people see us as Online Cenotaph as being sort of a key resource, and sometimes we haven't had all the detail because we don't have access to all the military files. The work that we've done over this time period is sort of trying to make a proxy so that people can get enough information to be able to go to the Defence Force to ask for information if they need it. It's also reducing the load on the Defence Force, where they have a huge amount of people requesting files. So at least we can give them a little bit of detail, especially around Navy service, when we just had nothing online until recently. So this is talking about the merchant Navy, so the records of New Zealand seamen, and these are two of our transcribers who worked with us over summer in 2021, 22. And Phoebe, I think, works now at Mount Roskill Library, and Alicia is actually continuing to transcribe with us at the moment. And so the Merchant Navy cards it was sort of insane, and we got some great funding from the C&L Gregory Trust, as well as the John Searle Say Foundation, who have funded another round of us transcribing content. And it gave us a really good insight, because it was the first time we'd really engaged with Merchant Navy service. We hadn't really considered it before, because people don't really ask about it, maybe because their dad was in the Union Steamship Company, like my great-grandfather was, and they just didn't think that that time period was actually service. I think they just thought that was their job. But I found that my great-grandfather served in the Merchant Navy during World War II. And so it's just not knowing, I think. And so I just chose, again, randomly, two cards from the set who had the same address, so they're father and son, and they're from Timaru, and I think that the dad, what's his name, Francis John, was the, what's it called, the harbour master in that area. And then his son also served in the Merchant Navy, and the guy in the middle is an army serviceman, the brother of Francis. And we have that record in Cenotaph, but we don't have the whole family history of other people serving. So in the future, we will be able to build up that story that the Callans contributed a lot more than army service, which is really really interesting. It's also interesting to see, because Merchant Navy, you're more likely to be a little bit older, like there's a broader range of age groups, that fathers and sons, it's not unusual for fathers and sons to be serving at the same time. Then we've got, again, we were surprised, there was a female merchant it's not seaman, is it really? Sea person who was a stewardess who took 33 embarkations. So, you know, it's highlighting stories that we didn't know before. So it's educating ourselves as well as providing content to the public. So I think I've spoken about the Navy records. So we added the Navy records, I think, maybe late last year, and I've slowly added more as they've come through, especially the Fleet Air service personnel. And these the images and screenshots are from records where family have already added information since we've uploaded it. And that I was going through making this presentation, and I just thought, oh wow, like sometimes in my flurry, or I get so focused that I forget that actually people really value us acknowledging their families online. And when I see that they've uploaded photos or just left a little message, it makes it really really meaningful. So I was like, do people care? And then you're like, yes, they do. So the RNZAF biographies are part of the transcription project, where we at the beginning decided to just transcribe the names. There's a little section at the top that says the pilot's, pilot officer Alexander Richard Abbott, and we just wrote that sort of biographical and service information because we thought we would just link the images. But in the end, we thought Marion loves to transcribe, so we'll make her transcribe the whole text. So the RNZAF biographies are really, actually really incredible resources held in Archives New Zealand. And I didn't know this until this project, the Air Force decided to write a biography for every person who died in active service during World War II. So there's about 7,000 biographical accounts in here, most of which will include their interest in sport. So everyone has to have what sport that they were interested in, which I thought was very sweet. And like his sporting interests included cricket, tennis, and athletics, and he was a member of the Wellington Technical First 15. So, so you get a little bit about their background because a lot of these guys were really were quite young. And then about their service, so their flight times and also sadly where they died and other information. So what we use for this project, instead of using Google Drive, which is sort of fine for Excel, a name, a last name, a service number, but when you've got big blocks of text, it sort of becomes a little bit unwieldy. We've used From the Page, where we have uploaded these pages to enable the content to be transcribed. So the stuff on the left is the original page, and the stuff on the right is likely Marion typing out the person's life and their service. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to get that content onto Cenotaph. We will work with Archives New Zealand that once we've transcribed these pages that we will provide them back to them. So that will at some point enrich their records as well. And that was sort of the agreement that we made. So I just thought I'd show you that you don't need to read it, but it's just, it's quite a lot of detail about these personnel. And you can search for the biographies in Archives New Zealand, but you have to scroll through, I think, 11 volumes to do it. Everything seems like it's 11 and it could be a lie. So this is the work that we've done using From the Page. And we also use it for other transcription projects, including our Bioheritage Diversity Library, books that are out of copyright. So if people want to get involved, they can go to fromthepage.com and search for Auckland Museum or anywhere. You could transcribe other organisations' collections as well. So also J-Force is another one that I think sort of got a little bit missed off with World War II. People believe it, maybe not treating it as it's just a ongoing service from World War II, but J-Force is a specific conflict. We only have about 6,000 references to J-Force, but we know that at least 12,000 people served. So at the moment, one of our volunteers is transcribing the embarkation rolls from the Middle East and Italy. So they were like, you're going home, but we're actually going to send you to Japan on the way home. So I don't know if everyone wanted to go to J-Force, but they did. And so I just chose a record where this service person from the 22 Battalion served in World War II, but we don't have any reference to them serving in J-Force, but I've seen that in the transcription, they served in J-Force. So it's about us being able to update and enrich records. So Liz is one of our transcribers, and she sort of feels like this is a really important thing for us to respectfully acknowledge their service, because we don't want people to feel like they've been ignored, and it's never our intention, and we always acknowledge that Online Cenotaph is a work in progress, and that the public can ask us to upload anything, and if it's not there, it's not because we don't want it to be there, it's just that there are 3 staff members working on this, and our team evolves. So the Korean War is another one that we've worked on and put content on. Again, I'm just giving you an example of somebody recently uploading a message after we've put up the new records, and it just sort of means that people really care about the records, but also care that they can express themselves online. So all of the fields in Online Cenotaph can be contributed to by the public. So you can upload photos, like a person is added to Barry's record, and you can add notes and poppies as well. We get about 6,000 poppies laid a month, so we may not get as many people uploading content, but there is definitely a lot of people wanting to acknowledge the records that they are looking at during the month. I think I may be coming to the end, so you'll have lots of times for questions. So the other one is the WACS and the WAF, so the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps and the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. I think I shouldn't have had the S as capital, but here we are. And we have had lots of research provided by people such as the preeminent Air Force researcher Errol Martin, but it's just there's no sourcing to where it's from his research. And so these lists will support us being able to say they were listed in an Archives New Zealand file that said their service at this point in time. And so that's always a really excellent thing to be able to do, is to be able to, again, enrich our records. Some of the files can be quite humorous, and I'm not sure that the person who necessarily would have wanted looks and feels tired to be put on their document. I will not tell you who that was. We wouldn't put that on our records, but it is sometimes quite interesting what is added to people's personnel files. And if you read World War I files, you can see that if they've been naughty, they'll have some things written on there as well. 100 years later, it can be funny, but maybe not for the person involved. Yeah, and I thought I would do a bit of a plug for a publication that I just published on Monday, got it across the line with the help of a lot of really great people at Auckland Museum. And it's a small publication that covers 25 years of Online Cenotaph, and it interviews the beautiful Stoney in there, as well as myself, Chris Pugsley, military historian, Dr. Gabrielle Fortune, who is a social historian, and others who've contributed to Online Cenotaph over the past 25 years. They sort of provide examples of the type of person who have really committed a huge amount of time, energy, and care to help support us. Because this is Online Cenotaph is an absolute collaborative effort. We don't pretend to be perfect, and so we always rely on the public to be able to give us and share their knowledge and their stories and their information. And so you can find it a link online and have a look through. I don't know if I'd want to write a book again, because there's a lot. I have to check a lot of like punctuations and grammar and things like that, and that's not necessarily my strong suit, but luckily my colleagues have got it doing that stuff. So I thought I'd add just some resources. I don't know if this PowerPoint will go anywhere, but we've written hundreds and hundreds of blogs about Online Cenotaph, and they get really, they're really interesting, and they provide context around our research, and can give you some insights into the work that we've been doing. And that is it. And I'm hoping that was not too short. I'm sorry if it was. Kia ora.